My name is Tracey. I'm a grateful woman in long-term recovery. And for me, what that means is I have not put a drug or a drink in my body for almost 12 years. And saying that today is a lot different than I ever thought possible. I never thought I would actually be able to say after over 20 years of use that I no longer have to worry about putting another drug or a drink in my body. I don't remember much of my childhood before I'm 11. My father was an alcoholic. My parents divorced. I left my dad to go live with my mom and left my brother and sisters behind and was basically raised as a single kid. But I was raised, I had a belief system that I was never enough. I was in reading resource, I was in math resource. I always felt like I was stupid, and if I wasn't doing something on the outside of myself to give myself value, then I had none. And I had this belief that you're stupid. My dad used to say, you're better seen, not heard. And him and my mom used to fight all the time, you know, and I just didn't know how to be okay being me. But as long as I was on the track team, tetherball champion, for those of you that know what tetherball is, you know, on the swim team, in junior miss pageants, as long as I was doing stuff like that, I was accepted. And it's really difficult having a belief system about yourself that you're not enough. It's really difficult to believe that you're not worthy of things that are good and that your life and your choices function from that space. And I'm sure you can relate to that. And as I got older, you know, I was raised in the church, in the LDS religion. My dad never went. My mom rarely went. So my grandparents were like these big, they were pillars to me, pillars of human beings. And they helped direct me a lot as I was a kid growing up. And so I was in church. I was a good girl in high school. I moved from California to Mladfricken, Idaho. So I went from a high school with 2,500 students to a school with like 160 enclosed, with junior high and high school all included. And I went right from the city and being a city girl to living on a farm in the middle of nowhere. But I always believed in God. I always had a belief system in that process. And when I graduated high school, and I was in reading resource and math resource my whole life. I failed math, I failed biology. I don't even know how I graduated, but I graduated with a 2.3 GPA, probably because it was Mlad. They allowed that. I knew I didn't want to waste my life. I had girlfriends that were pregnant when I graduated from high school. I've had a traumatic childhood. I was born without a hip socket in my hip. Like, I had problems passing out and blacking out all the time. I had low iron deficiency. And so I always felt like there was something wrong with me. Not just physically, but mentally. Like, there was always something wrong with me. And when I graduated high school, I knew I didn't want to work or have any kids. I wanted to work for Delta Airlines, and I wanted to fly all over the world and have a penthouse suite in Monterey and maybe one in New York, you know? And I had these grandeur dreams. And when I graduated high school, I went to Arizona to start living my life, and I moved in with my dad. And we had a vacation to Lake Havasu City. And I was 17 at the time when I graduated in 1985. And I met a boy and got pregnant. Something I never thought I would do. I really had a belief I had morals and I had values. You know, I didn't even swear in high school. I graduated high school as a virgin. Like, I never imagined that I would make those kind of decisions, but having the validation from an older man was, I don't know, it just felt really good. Not a small town guy, you know. And I got pregnant. Having her was the greatest thing that ever happened to me, but it changed the entire course of my life. And My dad forced me into this marriage. He said, if you don't marry him, you are not my daughter. And that's where this whole thing started changing for me. I married a man that I barely knew, and my first relationship was abuse. I suffered a great deal of abuse from that relationship. Left him, and it seemed like every relationship after that was the same. I just kept choosing wrong relationships. But when I left him, I went to California to live with my mom and ran with my daughter, and started school, got a job, was getting back on my feet, and I was feeling better about myself, but still feeling shame now. Shame because I had gone against everything I believed in growing up. So much shame. And when I went to school at ITT Tech, and I thought I could do computer programming. Now, I was in school resource for math. I failed it in high school, but for some reason I was thinking I could go be a computer programmer. And so I was working a lot and going to school a lot. And one day I needed help with homework because I just couldn't keep up, and I couldn't understand the work, and I couldn't understand how to read ohms. And I went to a study group. And in that study group, I was introduced to crank. And as soon as I did that, I knew I was addicted to it. I knew it immediately that I had found my saving grace. And within 6 months of that, I dropped out of school, blew up my car, ended up living found a dope dealer. Of course I found a dealer, and ended up spending a lot of time there. And I had my daughter with me, and my mom showed up, and she basically fought me to get my daughter out of my arms. And when my daughter was ripped out of my arms, that was it for me. I knew that this high ideal that I had, even though I knew, that I had made all of these mistakes, I still felt like maybe it was possible I was redeemable until that day. And when that day happened, I knew I was no longer redeemable, because my belief was I'd made too many mistakes. And when I fell down that rabbit hole, living in this drug house, I didn't know. I felt like I'd been taken right out of some fairy tale land and put into a TV show that, in experiences you only see on TV. I got people with knives and guns and using drugs all around the house. And the next thing you know, the traumatic events that I had experienced previously just became more traumatic. More drugs, rape, sacrificing, going against every moral I ever had, more trauma, more abuse, and that's where it all just continued to move for me. And then I had another child. I had my son, and I was a single mom again. My son's never met his dad. He's always been okay with that. When I was right with my kids, with my life. But when I was off, I was off. My kids were taken from me twice. I was very fortunate enough that my mom, who was always like that constant threat in my life, was always stepping in. And her stepping in made it so that they were never adopted out, if that makes sense, or that DCFS was involved. So I was really fortunate with that, because they had tried several times, different family members, to take my kids with DCFS. And my kids, by the time my daughter had hit 16, she left me. I'd had, like I said, periods of sobriety, and those periods of sobriety were like, so when I dropped out of school and all of that stuff happened, when I got tired of using, I just quit. I just walked away. I called my mom and I said, I need help. and she helped me get out of that situation. I didn't go to treatment. I didn't know there was such a thing about treatment. I didn't do AA, or I didn't know about that stuff, so I just quit because I was sick of it. And I've always worked. I've worked since I was 11 years old. When I moved to live with my mom, I had to work because my mom, she worked really hard to support us. But if I wanted anything extra, I worked for it for as long as I can remember. So what I know is go to work, Tracey. Just go to work, Tracey. And so that's basically how I continued to move through my life. Just go to work, Tracey. And so that's what I did. When I got saved from the first experience with all of that crazy, when my daughter got taken, I went back to Arizona. I got my own place with my brother, and I got a job. I got a couple of different jobs, and I actually got a job at a sewing machine, an industrial sewing machine company, and I was falling asleep at my desk. I was recovering, I was detoxing. And everyone that worked there were addicts in recovery. And they just let me move through that space, whatever that looked like for me. So what I've always learned to do is go to work. High school, I always worked through high school, paid for all my stuff through high school. Go to work. So when I got out of the first drug scene and drug experience I'd been in, I just went to work. And that worked for me for a little while. And I got into the mortgage industry. And the crazy thing is, you give me a mortgage loan, you want me to help you get a home loan, I could crunch those numbers like it was nothing. I have no idea where that came from. And I really excelled in moving up in that company as one of the lead processors, and started making really good money. We all have those experiences where things start going okay, and then you make those choices all over again, whether it's a man or, I don't know, a job or a friend, or something just happens to come along, and you're right back where you were when you left the first time. And I got right back in where I was the first time. And this time it was crack cocaine. When I walked away from that experience and all the wreckage, all the drama that comes with all of that, hurting my family, hurting my children, all the wreckage that comes with that, and when I was ready to walk away from that, I just walked away from that. When I was done, I was done. And I'm still in and out of bad relationships, one in particular. We kept coming back and going out, coming back and going out. And eventually, at one point, when I walked away from that, I walked away from it for a few years, and had a good part of my life at that time. I thought maybe I was doing okay. One of the things I was never fixing, I still didn't know about treatment. I still didn't know about programs. I had no idea that they existed. But when I started using methamphetamine when I was 36. Let me go back just a little bit. I got my first charge when I was 38 years old. And I got a felony DUI. And after that first charge, that's all it took for me to be in the system. And I caught 11 charges within 6 months in 7 different courthouses, from theft, possession, paraphernalia, driving on a suspended license, you name it, forgery, and so in and out of jail, in and out of jail. I was in the drug court program, failed the drug court program. I was in the DORA program, failed the DORA program, and my daughter was holding on to hope. And during all of this time, my daughter she got married. She had my first grandson, and I wasn't allowed to have anything to do with that, because she didn't want what was in my skin coming out and touching her baby. So she said, "I'm sorry, Mom, I need to protect my family from you." And I didn't blame her. Of course, back then, I was so offended, because it was all about me back then, my pity party. It was like, people are treating me this way. Do you know what's been done to me? Didn't know what accountability was back then. But in and out of jail, in and out of jail. I just couldn't get it right. I couldn't make right decisions. And I just kept adding to the shame. My shame story got louder and louder, and the toxic shame just got worse and worse, and I hated myself. I was dark. I started doing all kinds of shady stuff. And I became a monster. I became a monster. I didn't recognize what looked back at me from the mirror. I had no idea who that person was. And I missed her. You know, where you have this inner ache to get back to yourself, and you just don't even know what that looks like anymore, but you know it's there, that inner aching to get back to something better. You know, because we have that yearning inside of us. Everybody does. We have that yearning to just figure it out and stop making mistakes and stop doing the wrong thing. Because we get tired of hurting, and we get tired of hurting people, you know? And hurting people hurt people. It's just a fact of life for us. And my darkest dark, my lowest of low, was the last time I got arrested on a felony. So I'm a felon at this point. My judge said, if you ever come back in front of me, you're going to prison. I'm tired of seeing you in front of me. And I got arrested on an association charge, associating with another felon. I had no idea they were a felon. I hadn't seen that person in 3 years. We were at a softball game, talking. He was with his mom. Do you know what I mean? And I hadn't seen him in a long time. And at this point, I was at the Salvation Army in Ogden. I'd gotten released from jail. Women were leaving jail going somewhere, and I was like, where are all they going? Where are they going? And I'm gonna go there. And I got released to the Salvation Army program. And I didn't even know what that meant, but I had to work for my stay. I was 90 days in that program when I caught the association charge. And they came and arrested me on my 90th day from the Salvation Army program and threw me in jail. And I knew that was it for me. They arrested my friend too. And I went to prison on that association charge. So I had been clean since January 10th of 2010. Was the last time I used. When I went to jail, knowing that I was going to be going to prison, I fell to my knees, and I was all alone in my cell, and I fell to my knees. And I just started crying. You know, that ugly cry that you start doing from the depths of your soul? You know, I just started crying, and it didn't matter. You could reach your hand as far down inside of me as you wanted to pull out all of the grief and all of the pain and all of the yuck, and you would never hit bottom. You'd never hit bottom. And that's where that cry was coming from. And I heard this big voice inside my head, and I saw these great big hands with a great big white box, just as plain as day as I'm sitting here, that said, throw it all in. And the big hands put the box down next to me. And I started, in my mind's eye, throwing everything, all of that pain and that grief and that shame, all of it. I just started throwing all of it in that box. And when I was done throwing everything in that box, these great big hands came down, took the box, and as it was taking the box, the voice said, it is done. And in that very moment, I was overwhelmed with peace. Overwhelmed with peace. And so I knew that there was something greater than me that saw me and came and met me where I was happy. I'm 42 years old at this point, and I'm going to prison. That was my bottom, because I figured if I can't stay clean 90 days and I'm still going to prison on an association charge, I must belong. I must belong there. And when I went there, I had burned every single bridge. I hadn't anyone to call. I didn't have any letters to write. I didn't have anything. I knew that I was the biggest piece of crap, and I deserved to be kept away from everybody that I hurt, they were safe finally from me. And just maybe once I was finally safe from myself. But what I didn't realize being there was that you don't think you can die any more inside than you do, but you can. I died inside. Now this is the miraculous part. That presence that I felt that day in my cell was with me the entire time. I wasn't supposed to go into the drug rehab program in prison. The waiting list was humongous, and I went right into the drug rehab program. That's the first time I ever got treatment, was behind the bars of prison. I got treatment. I finally got help. And I got called out on my shit. Can I say that? I got called out on my crap. Because I still wanted to play the blame-shame game. I wanted to blame my childhood. I wanted to blame my being stupid and making all the mistakes. I wanted to blame everything else for all of the choices that I made. It was everybody else's fault. It was never my own. And if this would never have happened to me, or if that never happened to me, I never would have done this, or that never would have happened, you know? But I got called out by these women. These women were just like me. They were mothers, they were daughters, they were sisters, they were friends, they were broken, they were lost. But they were beautiful, they were honest, they were real, and they were just like me. That's when things began to change for me. When I first started getting called out on my stuff, I was pissed. You know, how dare you tell me about, you don't know me, you know? Nobody could tell me about myself. I started going to every possible program in church. I started taking every single life skills class that I could possibly take. I started recognizing I was a blank slate when I went in there. I had nothing to lose and everything to gain, and that's what I did. So I just started doing the most. What did I start doing? I went to frickin' work, man. What do I know how to do? I know how to go to work, and that's what I did. And now, I'd been baptized LDS in the course of all this stuff happening. I'd been baptized Catholic in the course of all this stuff happening. I've been baptized Christian in the course of all of my life happening, seeking a power greater than me, something to fill this void. And I've experienced God's presence in all of that, all of it. But never once did I experience it the way I felt it when I was my loneliness, broken self. And that power greater than me, whom I choose to call God, is what saved me from myself, because he put me where I needed to be. He took me out of my life. He plucked me out of my hell and put me into a place where I could stop and take a look at things really hard. Spent my 43rd birthday in prison. Went to the board. That was my downfall. That was my turning point. Was prison. But let me tell you something. When I walked out those doors, I've never looked back. I've never looked back. What I knew that I never wanted again is I never wanted to feel the pain I had felt I'm 43 years old. I was tired of having pain, and I was tired of being the creator of pain. I was tired of being the wrecking ball of my entire life. And I wanted my kids. My son hated me. He said, "Don't ever call me. I don't trust you. I don't like you. Don't you ever effing call me again." You know, I tried calling him one time, even after he said that, and he's like, "I told you never to call me," and hung up on me. I just missed my kids. My daughter was pregnant. I found out just before I went into prison that my daughter was having another baby. And I was going to prison, and I was gonna miss all of it. All of it. Again. Failed. I was nothing but a failure, you know? But I've never looked back when those doors closed behind me. There were these beautiful, wonderful women that would come in on Sundays. There were meetings, like NA meetings, HA meetings, CMA, Crystal Meth Anonymous meetings. Did not even know that was a thing, even though that's exactly what I needed. But there were all kinds of meetings in prison that you were required to go to. But this one particular meeting on Sunday was an NA meeting, and these 4 beautiful women would come in and they would share their experience, strength, and hope with all of us broken women. And I knew that I was going to be like them. I wanted what they had. I wanted it. I longed for it. That's what I wanted. And I was told, get a sponsor, work the steps. This is the messages they were bringing, you know, work a program. And so I called one of them, and when the day I got out of prison, I'm like, will you be my sponsor? I had no idea what it meant. Felt kind of like a blind date, you know? So I got a sponsor. And I went into sober living. And in sober living, the first sober living I went to was like a crack house without the crack. It was terrifying. My mom was like, I am not leaving you here, you know? So that's where my recovery began. And I went into sober living. But from that sober living, I got put into a different sober living. And that sober living saved my life. Because I didn't know how to live life on life's terms. I didn't know how to live life sober. And I was just learning how to live in my own skin. I was just learning how to find my own value. And I still needed to be shown a better way to live. And so I let these women in the program, in sober living, and in AA, NA, I didn't care. I was grasping at all the A's. I just knew that I wanted more. And I wanted what they all had, because if they could do it, and they were like me, I could do it. I'll never forget my first Mother's Day out of prison, where I got to meet my granddaughter for the first time. I don't cry because I regret or I'm sad or carry shame for those things anymore. You know, I cry because it's part of my story. And those are just things that were so near and dear to me, and the pain was so deep back then that it's just the emotion that's still attached to it, if that makes sense. And I just continued to work that program. I continued to work the program. I continued to do what I was told. I took the bus. Never took a bus before in my life. I had my driver's license when I was 14. I learned how to take a bus. I learned how to work for $7.50 an hour. But that job got me to another job that put me in contact with a guy who worked at a treatment center. And the guy at the treatment center is like, you need to come and apply. And so I went and applied. So I got this job here, and now I'm working at a treatment center as a mentor, if you can believe that. And I'm actually mentoring other people in recovery. And I worked graveyard shifts, and one of the craziest things about that is when the prison guards would come by, and if your head was covered up, they would knock on your window or your door with the flashlight and shine the light in your face. And when I got this job at the treatment center, they gave me a flashlight to do that to the clients to make sure that they were in bed, and I was just like, ding. You know, I didn't want to traumatize them like I was traumatized. But so I did that, and then I got another job. So I've got 3 jobs that I'm working now. And I went from that job to working in a private detox facility. And I worked my way up through that private detox facility, but never once in all of that did I stop working. You know, when you're first getting in recovery, and when you're first trying to figure out what's next, how do I do this? Because you're still filled with doubt about what you can do. You still have that fear in the back of your mind that you're gonna fail because you've always failed. But if you just, sometimes, you know what an army crawl is? When you're digging through the mud, sometimes you have to just crawl. You know, do the army crawl. And at one point, you get back up, and all of a sudden you're on your knees. And then the next thing you're doing is you're finally walking. And the next thing you know, you're walking tall. And the next thing you know, you're walking your program. And sometimes you go back to the army crawl. But you never stop moving forward. And that's what I learned. You just don't Stop. I am an addict. I am an addict of the worst kind. My uncle threw a book at me one time. He said, and he goes, here, this book will help you. And he throws this book at me, and the cover was said, The Cure for Addiction or Alcohol and Drugs. And you open up the book, it's like that thick, and every page is blank. Because there is no cure. There's only a daily reprieve based on certain spiritual principles that we have to do to maintain what we have. And it looks different for everyone. There is no one way to find your way. The purpose is finding your way, whatever that takes, whatever that looks like. You know, because we all deserve freedom. From our addiction, we deserve freedom from our past. You can't go back and rewrite what has happened. We have to remember it has happened. But it's not today. If we can accept what has happened, then we can live in this present moment without worrying about what's going to happen next. I don't worry about in my life today what's going to happen next. But when I was at the detox center, I went back to school. I went to college. One of the nurses there, she's like, go to school. I'm like, I don't want to go to school. She's like, you need to go to school. And I was like, I don't want to go to school. And we were working a graveyard shift together. She pulled up the application on the website. I filled out the application. I went to frickin' school. And, you know, I graduated with my bachelor's in psychology. I got my substance abuse counselor license. I graduated with a 3.56 GPA. What? You know, I had to take a couple math classes twice. I didn't care, you know. But I went back to school. And the whole time that things are working, 5 years after I got done or walked out of prison, 5 years later, I finally paid off all of the debt from the consequences of my past. Just because you stopped doing all the stupid stuff you were doing, causing wreckage, doesn't mean the wreckage doesn't have to have time to clear up. You have to keep moving forward as your wreckage is getting cleaned up. Because eventually, as you keep moving forward, all the wreckage that you created catches up, and all of a sudden you don't have anymore. And you can move forward with a little more freedom than you did before. And, you know, and it's not a marathon. It's not a marathon. I continued to work in the program, and I continued to just do the next right thing and the next right thing, and before you know it, I got my son in my life. I got my son living with me, you know. I've got my daughter. I've got my grandkids. I got 4 grandkids now, and none of them know me as an addict. None of them know me as a failure. None of them do. Now I know that my kids have residual. There's residual stuff that they carry around because of the mom that they had, you know. But one of the things I know is they know I'm not going anywhere today. My daughter's 35, my son's 31. We have a bonded relationship. A bonded relationship. I'm a program director of a treatment center today. I'm a substance abuse counselor, and I do what I do because you can do what I do. Don't quit. Trust people around you to help you. Ask for help. If you're not asking, you're not getting, and if you're not getting, you're going to die. We're not meant to do this on our own. But there is freedom. If you can step into that fear and push through getting there with the hands of other people helping you move along the way, you will have freedom. You will have the life that you've always wanted, that you never thought possible. And one of the best things you'll gain is a love for yourself. The kind of love for yourself that isn't based on what other people think you are or what you should be, but on what you know you are and who you know you are. And that love that you gain for yourself is the best gift you can give yourself. Don't quit. Don't quit, because you're worth it. There's a power greater than you that's fighting in your corner, that's got his hand out to you. Take it. Take the hands. I promise you, you'll get to where you need to be.